Hi there, welcome along to Taking the Biz, the channel for A-level business students. First time watchers, perhaps think about subscribing as you revise for your exams. This tutorial is going to focus on the labour productivity calculation. And labour productivity remains a very important measurement of an organisation's human resources. And the reason for that is because labour is usually, if not the biggest, one of a firm's biggest costs. Even firms that are quite capital intensive, that capital tends to have been paid for in a one-off upfront cost, whereas labour has a continuous month-by-month cost attached to it. So accordingly, firms want to try and ensure that they are squeezing as much work, as much productivity from their labour force as they possibly can. Now, labour productivity is calculated by examining the amount of output that a workforce is able to produce. And we could measure that on an hourly basis in organisations that have quite a high output volume, or we might measure it over a time period like a day or a month, or may even take a longer term view and calculate the labour productivity for the year. And we're going to divide that output over a time period by the number of employees that the firm has recruited in order to produce that many products. So for example, if a firm was able to produce 100 units per hour and it had recruited or hired 20 workers to produce that output, then they would have a labour productivity of 100 over 20. And what it shows us is, on average, although some of those workers might work harder or faster than others, it shows us the average number of products that are produced per worker, per unit of labour. So in this context, it shows us that on average, each of our worker is producing 5 products per hour, because 20 of them can produce 100 units. Now, it's quite useful to be able to compare the labour productivity of a firm maybe to previous years, so we can see whether the figure is improving and we're squeezing additional output per employee out of our workforce, or maybe we could even try and do some inter-firm comparisons to see how our productivity might stack up against other firms in the same industry. Now, labour productivity is so important because it affects a firm's costs. If you have to hire more employees, if you need a larger labour force than your rivals do to create the same number of products, then it makes sense that your costs may well be higher. If you need 30 workers to produce 100 products an hour when your rival only requires 20 workers, then probably your costs are going to be larger. Now, we know that costs might have a direct feed into the prices that the organisation charges. So if you have to hire 10 more employees to create the same number of products or the same level of output, then that's probably going to be reflected in the fact that you're going to have to charge consumers a higher price for your product. Now, for some firms that may not be an issue because they have the kind of good that might command a higher price. Maybe it's more luxurious, maybe it's higher quality. But for firms that are in direct rivalry with competitors that are perhaps selling at a similar quality level to themselves or a similar kind of product offering, it might mean that they're charging higher prices now than rivals, and that is going to damage the firm's competitiveness. If you have two broadly similar products on the shelves in terms of quality and in terms of what they can offer to consumers, then it makes sense that consumers are going to be drawn towards the one that's sold at the cheaper price. So labour productivity affects costs. Costs can affect prices, and prices can affect competitiveness. However, there is one issue that we'll point out with the labour productivity, and that is that firms that might have a lower labour productivity may still find that they are able to be competitive because the labour productivity calculation doesn't factor in how much we're actually paying those workers. For example, we might have business A recruits 20 workers to produce an output level of 100, and business B has to recruit 30 employees to create the same level of output, the same 100 products. But what we haven't looked at is what business A and business B have to offer those employees in terms of wages. And it could be that the firm that has the lower labour productivity level might be paying each of those workers an awful lot less. And that may be why they're not quite as productive, but it might mean that our costs aren't quite as high overall as we were expecting. So firms with poor labour productivity may still be able to be competitive if they are paying lower wage rates than rivals in the industry. So this is why we also have another measure of the human resource performance of an organisation. We might also look at the labour cost per unit, and that measurement will show us how much we're having to pay labour to create one of our products, and it's a little measure that we can use alongside labour productivity. But productivity is still a very important figure because it allows us to compare year on year how much work we are squeezing per employee out of our labour force, and it hints at the management of the organisation. And if it's a figure that's rising, or if it's a figure that's higher than industry averages, then it makes sense that our managers are doing something right because they're running a productive workforce, creating a lot of output per employee. So there's our labour productivity figure. It's a calculation we might get asked to do in the exam, or it's something we might get asked to write a longer answer about and comment on. So definitely one for revising. Good luck as you carry on preparing for those exams, and we will see you very soon on Taking the Biz.